Hey guys, welcome back to the final episode of building a sign up feature using SwiftUI, Combine, and MVVM. Before getting started, let me wish you a happy and healthy new year. So, in this episode, we are going to build the HTTP service side code using Combine, which will be consumed by the MVVM side. We will also implement an email validation on the server side and trigger an error message on the client based on the email's availability for sign up. And finally, we will conclude this episode by implementing the sign up flow after having validated all the publishers bound with username, email, password, and confirm password. So let's get the ball rolling right away. So what do we have right now? So we have the UI elements with client-side validations completed. Let's say username validation on the client side, email validation on the client side with the required and email validations being taken care, password and confirm password. All these validation on the client side are complete, and we don't have anything yet for the sign up button completed. So whatever we are going to do right now is I'm going to pick up an existing code where I already have some server side code already available as part of a different project called a green grocery, which is already available in my repository in Patreon site. So if you want to check out this project, then you can go to my Patreon site and then check that out. So otherwise, whatever I am interested right now is these two services, the HTTP service and the HTTP router, which actually does the login, registration, and all those validations, all those features. I mean, the HTTP functions. So whatever I'm going to do is just bring these two into the other project. You can find so this is the green grocery project. Let me just go back to the sign up UI project. Let me just bring it in here by adding a new group called service. Create items. Hope it's there. Let's just go and check. So it's now part of the SwiftUI project. So that's available now. It's not going to compile yet because it requires Fire dependency. So let's also include that. Go to this project, pod init. So that will create an pod file for me. And I'll just have to include Fire dependency. Save it, and then I can just close this project because it will require me to open a workspace. I can do a pod install now. So now it has added a pod version of the project now. So it has created a workspace, which is what I will be opening right now. So let's see us, which is having a pod dependency of Fire. Still, it has some dependency where it requires auth model and everything. But before that, let me just also create strip down this version to whatever we require. Whatever we require is a sign up function and something to validate an email. Those are the two functions which are required. So I'm not going to use any of these. Maybe I'll just keep this validate and make it as email. And still I would need this auth model, which I'm going to grab from the other project. So I already have it in my existing project. I'm going to include it as part of this one now. Finish. Now I have auth model as part of this. So it's nothing but it has name, email, and password, three parameters which are required to sign up the user. So these three included now. So it should not give me that error at least. So auth is included. Now I need to also have the HTTP router, which is more like something which I had defined for my other project where it uses LMFI as a router pattern. So just that if you just want to have a look at that feature, how to implement that, then you can maybe see a different tutorial which I had created for how to create an LMFI router pattern, which I'll include the link in the description section so that you can have a look at it. So just even grab this one HTTP router and include it as part of the service itself. So this is nothing but has the basic things to create a request, like the base URL, the path method, headers, and all those stuff required. So that's also done. HTTP service. Again, that's my bad. If this is something I need to create, HTTP service is a protocol which I have defined. Let me also include that. It's my bad. I totally lost track of whatever I had created. So that's also done now. So LMFire is fine. There's no harm in the usage of this version. Only that I had created something called an HTTP service, which I forgot to include here. That's also done. Now we have 13 dependencies. Starts a session manager. So some of the changes we might have to start doing here are related to the LMFI version. So let me just see what all things have changed here. So this session manager has become now a session in LMFI. So that's one change. I might just have to call it as session.default. So this will also trigger some changes in my HTTP. This is already session because I had grabbed it from my existing project. So it's now session itself. That's okay right now. So we have removed sign up functions. Let's also remove all those. So refresh token, logout, and all those things are not required at this point for me. Sign up is needed. Refresh token not needed. Logout not needed. This is sign up is a post record and validate is going to be a get here. So I'll have to just check whatever I have defined in my current implementation. Let me just have a look at that as well. Okay, so validate, I have created something called as a validate email function. So maybe I'll just name it as email, validate email itself, so that it's consistent with my implementations. And even this, I've made it as that's again a post because I'm sending it as a post object. So validate email does not necessarily need this, or maybe yes, it needs the email ID. And this I'm gonna change it to validate email. This is the endpoint which I have defined on the server side. This is what I need to hit to the server so that I can validate my email. So that's all also done now. Can remove these cases. Sign up, and this is going to be validate email, which is gonna give me an email. So for there, the changes I need are I don't need this email here. I can just keep it as, because it's just going to send my content in the application JSON format. So I don't need this section. I can just keep this as part of this. Both of these requests for sign up as well as validate email, both of them are going to send a header of type content type application JSON. So that's anyway consistent in both cases. So I don't need to do any change there. I'm just modifying it over here. Login not needed, again removing that. Logout not needed. whatever I need to keep is sign up, which anyway has the same implementation like whatever I had in the earlier project. And also I need to have this validate email, which will give me an email to validate. So here I need to return something, try JSON encode something, or maybe I can just create it as a, because it's just one parameter. I don't need a coder struct for that. I can just send it as an array, or in a dictionary format. Encode this like JSON encoder dot encode, and I just can pass email, which is the key on the server, and a value, so email. So this will actually create a create a request. Body is created now, and what is missing? Expected. That's because of code is fine. Maybe I missed something over here. Yeah, this is missing. So that's done. So I managed to add two functions. I stripped down the bigger version to whatever we require right now into one as a sign up function, and then a validate email function, which just captures your email ID which you're validating before even signing up. So whatever it does is it goes and checks in the server whether this email which I'm trying to sign up is already used there or not. So this validation we are going to combine with the email validations which we had already created for the client. Like first is the require validation, then was the whether the entered value is an actually valid email format or not. That's a second check. As soon as that second check is completed, we'll trigger a server request to check whether this email is already used or not. So that is a third validation we are going to implement in this scenario using this service which we have defined right now. So I guess this is pretty much okay. Let's just review it once. I have a router, validate email, passing an email. Base URL remains the same. This is what the URL which I'm going to hit on. Then the path is validate email. That's also fine. Method is going to be post. That's also fine. Validate email. Header is going to be content type application JSON. That's also fine. No parameters are being passed as in this case. The body is what? Email validation is going to accept an email dictionary, which we are going to encode and send to the server. So that's pretty much done now. So what do we need now? So we have the HTTP router and the HTTP service both ready. What do we need to make this happen? So we are already in other project. I have used one more service, which is actually the consumer of both of these services, which is called auth service. So this works pretty much simply like you have all the functions required, and then you just consume the router and the auth service and then make that request through this. So this in a way encapsulates or hides the details of the implementation of your server side. So that is the advantage of using this service, and it is also implementing an auth API. So without using whatever I have here, I'm going to directly grab the final version which I have used in my finished project and then use that directly. Auth API and auth service, these two things are what I need. I'll just show you what all implementations are being done in that one. Auth API is nothing but has that check email function and the sign up function. So, two functions. And okay, maybe I should have done the other way. Let's just start with the closure implementation and then bring it into this version of future implementation. Maybe I'll just remove these two. Makes sense. Auth service and auth API. Remove these. And I have this groceries API. Maybe I'll just use auth service, the other project. Auth service. And let me create one more protocol called auth API. And then go to the other project and grab that auth API implementation, or the declaration of auth API protocol. It has so many things. We might just strip that down to bare minimum which is required. Okay, it's asking for all things which we might not need. We'll remove these things. So this is pretty much the base scenario, and let's just add we don't have the other case yet, where we it might be like okay, let's just keep maybe this validate thing and then modify that into the check email function. So this validate has now a token based. Similarly, we can modify this into check email, and then maybe modify this to email, and it would have looked with something like this with closures if we had not used the SwiftUI features or the new combined features. Like if you're not using future, which is something like a publisher which can listen to signals asynchronously, like you make a request and wait for the response. Until then, that future will promise you a response. So that's how it works. So that's what the change we will make here. So first thing is, it was using closures before, success, token type and everything. So let me just change this auth HTTP auth service to the other version. So login and all we don't need. Let's just keep validate. Let's modify it. Make it as check email. So ideally it should return me boolean, because I'm gonna check whether this email is already used or not, something like that. And so this is one change. Sign up is remaining like this itself, and check email is like something like this. I don't need the rest of the things. So this more or less looks like my closure version of the service, but whatever we are intending to do here is modify this into the future version or the combined version, where these closures are gonna get replaced with the publisher versions, which will listen for a signal and send those. Works similar to how a closure is working, but then you will see the magic happening when I start integrating this with my view model. So let's maybe just start doing that things. So check email, it does not have a function called validate, so I guess it has a function called validate email. It is asking for an email. And then gives you all those validation errors, which are something like a struct which we will create, and we will have the codable implementation of it to parse it. So let's just do that bit later. Let me just do this, show you how this is going to work with the new approach. So for that, let me just grab and change things to some extent. So my auth service or auth API is going to look like, so instead of these closures, I'm going to modify it. It's going to return me a token type expires in three values if it was a closure. So instead of this, I'm gonna get rid of these two and make it into a future object, which is nothing but a publisher in, given by combine, which you can include in your project and make it work asynchronously. Like you can make an API request, get the response, something like that. So for that definition, we can get rid of these things. Sign up, I'm going to modify right now and make it as a return type. So this function, as soon as you make a call, is going to return you a type called future, which you can subscribe to and start listening to changes happening. So that's the first thing. So first import is going to happen here. I'm going to import combine here. There is no Alamofire import here because that's all being taken care in the HTTP router and HTTP service side. So here it's more like including whatever I called as a future now. So sign up is going to give me two things. Whatever I'm going to ask for is whether this request was successful, the sign up was successful. If it was successful, I'll send I will not do this parsing in this auth service layer itself, because I feel again it's not the responsibility of this service to actually do the parsing side. It can be taken care by another parser altogether. So for that, I'm just going to do a bool a status code. So parsing is going to be different based on different status code. If I get a status code like 200, then I'm going to parse my response for the success. So if some other cases like 401, then those are failure cases where the parsing is going to be for the failed cases. So that's why I'm sending across the status code as well, along with my data, which is coming as a response. Data is nothing but a regular data object. So that's my future. So this function now, instead of relying on my closures, it's now going to rely on a future to make those response callbacks. So this also needs something like this future accepts two parameters. One is what is your success type, what is your error type. So those two is what we are passing. On success, this is what I send, and on error I need to send an error object. That's how it works. So it accepts two types of parameters. So the same implementation I also need to make in my API side. Sign up, I'm getting rid of these things and making it a future type. Similar implementation even here. So future is coming from combine. And data is coming from foundation. Okay, I don't need this. That's pretty cool. Now that's done. Now we are going to modify even our check email feature. So sign up pretty much is now we start modifying sign up. Before that, let's also modify check email. So in a regular format, if it was not using combine, then it would have service would have given me a success 200 or something, saying that this user is already, this email is already consumed by somebody else, so try with something else. Or if there is an error, then it gives me success means it will give me a 200 saying you can use it. Failure means I can just send a response saying 401 maybe unauthorized. So that means I can say this user is already used up. something something like that. So here just getting rid of these things and making it a future version even here. So I'm just saying bool, maybe that's right. Yeah. Because I'm going to rely on my status code here 200 directly. I can say okay, this is a good case for using for sign up. Email is valid for a sign up. If not, it's already used. So it's pretty simple there. And a type of error, there are different ways you can use this. You can in at least in this case, because I'm relying on the UI side to update me all the time without erroring this out. So I can use this bool to send failure or success and never error out this API calls. That's one way you can also use your APIs. Other case you had used was you are sending some response as well as an error. If you send an error, then that observable ends then and there. It does not. The publisher will stop sending signals as soon as it encounters an error. So if you want to avoid that, one way is to send something called as a never. That means this function is never going to error out. It's always going to send some responses. That's how it's going to work. So my future is going to respond with true or false. If true, that means I can use this email. If false, then I can't use it. I'll have to check for another email. So that's how it's going to work. So I'll also modify my API. Pretty good. That's also done. I'm left with 15 errors. Maybe that's all because of these validation cases which we might have to handle. So let's just do this basic thing right now. Let's just get rid of all these error cases and then make it simpler. So I'm gonna send all these parsing logic to a different file called a parser. I might call it as auth service parser. Auth service parser. Let's just keep that there. So whatever I'm intending to do here is move the parsing logic to a different layer instead of keeping that in the auth service layer. So my thing will end as soon as I get a response. I'll check the status code, or maybe I'll just send the status code along with the error on sign up using this future. So how to create a future? That's next thing. Creating a future is very, very simple. All you have to do is you already have this function call here. All you have to do is return a future with the same set of parameters like you have defined. Status code, data, error. That's my future. So this will require a parameter which is called as a promise. So promise is what will return you the values. So that's one parameter we will pass. The future is created now. So this whatever we are returning is through this future, and we just have to bring this whole logic within that future. So it's nothing but created a future, moved the API logic inside that future, and you know that API is going to make a call and get a response, request and response JSON format, a data object. We don't need all these anymore. Let's just strip it down, and we know that there is a status code and a corresponding status error object, or if a success object as well as an error object. Like 401 is going to give you a error, so that we can send as an error object. So we now know what we need to do. We have this promise ready now, so we can just modify this whole logic, big logic, into, so it's pretty simple. Whatever we are going to check is, if the status code is 200, we'll just send the data. We are doing some things here, that parsing logic. I'm just gonna bring that into a parser file. I'm not going to implement that for the sake of time, but just going to import whatever code that is there. And we can just directly import it here, delete, because it's nothing but just a parser being moved to a different so I can just show you that that's a parser. So it has some things which I have to include as well. So if you see, this is a sign up parser. So parse sign up response, whatever we get, we are going to send it the status code and the data to this function, and it's going to respond with an any publisher. So any publisher we already discussed in the earlier tutorial, where it's just a publisher on which you can subscribe, as well as you can set values to these. You can subscribe to it and start listening to changes happening to this subscribe. Any you define an any publisher like this, and then start sending value using something called as a jest. Jest is nothing but if you want to send one response as soon as you get a let's say some signal, if you want to send it to a subscriber, you just call it using a jest. It should be of the same type, like whatever we are going to send it back as. And maybe this needs parsing itself requires a different tutorial. Maybe I'll just take that up later. Just let me know in the comment section. But parser is nothing but it creates again an observable type or a publisher type as a response. So this is what I have included right now, parser. So auth result is something which I also need to include. So that's nothing but the HTTP auth service itself. I have different can just keep it. This is my auth result, which is a generic type on which I can pass any kind of values, and it will return me a success or a failure. So that's what this auth result is. And I need a token response model, but I'm not going to use it for any sake. It's just that I'm gonna get a token response whenever sign up is successful, but I'm not going to use this token in this tutorial, at least, because I'll just be seeing whether the request is successful, sign up is successful, and whether it is returning a token or not. If it is returning a token, then my sign up is successful. So just including this in my, that's my token. It's the same thing which is coming as a response here. Like if you go to the auth service, this is returning me access token, token type, and expires in 3 fields. So that's what I'm capturing using a decodable here. So I was not doing that here, but in the parser which I have created, I'm doing in that way. Like whatever I'm sending as a data, it's this parser is actually taking and seeing whether my status is 200. If it is 200, then I'm creating that token response model, decoding it and sending. If there is an error, I'm just throwing this invalid JSON errors. So I'll just keep those errors as well. So there are some kinds of sign up error which can happen. So I'm just keeping that as well along with this sign up error, like email can exist or not. Email exists, invalid data, invalid JSON, an error, some other kind of error which we can send some error string. So this is what I have used here. sign up. If my token parsing is failing, then I'll just say invalid. JSON is not valid. I'll just throw that error here. So I use these errors because my publisher is expecting an error type. So I also need to send. How do I send it? I can just say grab this just value. How is that I have created this publisher? Just using return something called as a just is nothing but it creates a publisher object and using a value which you have. In this case it's the status code and the data which is part of which is something is which is passed as part of this function parse sign up response. Using that and creating an observable or a publisher and mapping it using the status code and converting that into either the sign up model or the error object. So this auth result can actually take up two kinds of objects. If you see, auth result can take a success case and send a value, or it can say an error case and send a value. So whatever I'm doing here is, if my parsing is fine, let's say I get a status code which is not 200, I go in else, in that case I go here and try to get the error which is sent by the server. It can be of three types. If I'm doing a sign up, it can be a name error if I have not entered something. These are not going to happen anyway because we are already validating these cases on the client side. Let's say if we had not validated on the client side, then these things are going to come into picture. Let's say sign up error. Also let me include that so that I avoid this error, sign up error model. Hopefully that's the last error model which I need to include. Not yet, still 16 are there. Okay, so sign up error model is a codable which has these errors for name, email and password. So it is not going to happen anyway because we are handling these things on the client side itself. In case it happens, let's say if you forget to include those validations, if it's missed, then it's going to come back through these server errors. And once this server error happens, we return either a failure or a success. Or if something which is not captured by in any of these cases, then we send it as a error object, like sign up error invalid JSON or something. In this case it can be the parsing fails, then I'll just send, because this is not a valid error which is captured from, let's say, my server errors. I would have sent it as a server error through auth result failure if it was something which I had expected, like name is missing, email is missing, or password is missing. But if parsing itself is failing, then I can just throw this as an invalid JSON error and then let this publisher handle that. Publisher also handles error cases. So if you are subscribed to the success case, success in the sense a true success with 200 response and the token being sent back, or a failure which is more like a server failure, not something like a parsing failure, where again I'm considering it as a response but passing it through the auth results failure case. So I'm not erroring it out because it is going to go through my success case, which is what I'm sending as a publisher object here. So I think this is pretty much covered in depth right now. So whatever I'm doing here is I have written a parse sign up response function, which is nothing but as soon as a response from the server happens, I'll pass that status code and data to this function, which then translate this into a publisher objects and then tries to map it into a response type of this kind, auth result of token response model, which is what finally I sent here. token response model, I'm sending as a success value through token response model. So this success is nothing but auth result. Auth result of token response model is what I am sending as a first as a success parameter. If there is an error, then I throw an error here, which will be captured by my subscriber, and then it will handle at that point. So I guess this is pretty much clear, this parsing logic. 200 and 4012 cases. So I have included now the parser. So what I can do is I can get rid of all these, whatever I had in the earlier code where parsing was totally handled by the service side code. It's not a good way of doing it anyway. So I remove all that. Even this thinner version of things. So what should I have in here instead of whatever we had earlier? Let's go back and check once. Auth service just returns me response. I'm gonna just do something like guard response dot status code. If it is 200, else something should happen. So that's my thing. So here whatever I'm gonna do is do a promise. So I already have this promise as a closure type, promise here, so I can use that. So this is what promises me a response. Promise, I can just say this is a failure case, so I can just pass an error in this case. Or we have defined it already. Sign up response, sign up error dot, this is what case where data is invalid. What is it? Okay, invalid data maybe. So whatever I tried to sign up using, that data is invalid, or I got a response from the server saying the data is invalid. So if it was valid, or the response was proper with 200 as response, then I can send success here with these two values. So that's what I have defined as a future. If it is success, this is my type. If it is failure, I send an error type. So I can just say promise status code. I already have status code. So let me maybe define it. Let status code is equal to status code, and this status code is 200. Then I'll just send this status code and the response data response is response dot data. Maybe this needs to be let data is equal to this. Okay, so it can just pass this data here. That's also good. Now final thing, again, if there is a failure here, I can just say error and promise. I'm just saying invalid data. Something went wrong, and then okay, it's because I not had a closure for this. Return. Now it should be fine. Let me re-intend and see. Still I have error. Promise successful here. Okay, again missed. Now that's rectified. It's a tuple. be okay. So HTTP service is what is missing now. HTTP service is what I need to pass references of HTTP service through this closure. So we need to pass it here. That's done. So I guess pretty much sign up is finished with we managed to modify to the future version. It's pretty easy. You return a future and it gives you a parameter called promise, which you use to send a failure or success. So this is what will keep sending signals. As soon as a failure is encountered, this will stop sending any more signals. So that is valid for some case where you make a sign up, you're not expecting more than one response. As soon as you get first response, you can just say end it. So maybe after this promise success is over, I need to see whether I can call complete it once that is done, or I don't think that's needed. This is pretty much fine. Promise one success, it returns that is the end of it. Maybe I'll just check that once and then come back to you whether this will actually complete my observable signaling. So that's pretty much on the sign up side. Let's see what's wrong with future. Maybe this is because this is not yet resolved, it's giving me that error. Let me resolve that once. So similar to what we did here, return a future of type bool and never. This promise, same stuff, bring this inside, but the functions are different here, so you'll have to be careful with that. So validate email, passing the email, request using HTTP service, pass that here, HTTP service, and response is giving me a 200. Similar case, 200, I should do something, and if not, I should do, I can just promise a good response here. So I can just use this promise again here. Promise here, at least we will not error out because we are saying it's never, type never. So we can just say return promise. If it is, I can just say success false. It's not this two. It's not 200. So my validation is a failure. So this email cannot be used. Otherwise, I can just say true. So these two cases, I can just bring it here. In some other cases, if it fails, it comes here. So again, I have missed some. Because of this again, I guess. Yeah, again reintent, I keep forgetting what's reintent. Okay, too many. Do this is extra. Okay, I missed. Okay, that's pretty much resolved. Reintent, everything is fine now. So sign up and check email. Two functions, email, future, bool, never. So again, it returns me success, false. If it is 200, I send a promise, success, true. So my future is done. Future is nothing but it's kind of an observable or a publisher which can use which we can use mostly for making HTTP calls like these. Again, this should return here. That's done. Success. Still showing one error. I think it's not related. Clean it once. All good. So we managed to create two functions: sign up, check email, both hitting the server and getting us responses. So that's pretty much done right now. Validate email and register.